If you've ever been stared at from head to toe and then decided you didn't belong there in less than 3 seconds, then this story is for you. Before we begin, if you believe that true stories that don't need shouting but still touch the listener's heart deserve to be shared, please. Like, subscribe, and share this channel. Not for us, but for those out there who have silently swallowed their pain. Now listen carefully. The sound of the paper being torn wasn't loud, not harsh, not resounding. But at Gate C17 of Hartsfield, Jackson Atlanta International Airport, in the midst of a gray winter afternoon, it plummeted through the air like a gunshot. Everything stood still. The announcements were drowned out. The rolling of suitcases stopped abruptly. Even the sound of crying children suddenly ceased. The young black woman standing at the boarding gate didn't scream. She didn't cry. She didn't react as expected. She just stood there. Her hands clutched the worn canvas. Backpack straps. Her gaze lowered as if reminding herself to breathe. And then she took out her phone. The woman who had just torn the ticket, wearing a Navy flight attendant uniform with a shiny silver badge on her chest, crossed her arms. She laughed. A smug smile, the kind of smile someone has when they believe they've just restored order. "You heard me," she said loudly, loud enough for the passengers behind her to hear. "You are not allowed on this flight." The girl didn't look at her. She looked down at her phone screen and dialed a number that was already saved. The call rang. Once, then twice. On the other end of the line, a deep, slow, and very calm male voice spoke. "Ava, have you boarded the plane yet?" The girl, whose name was Ava Sterling, swallowed softly. "Not yet, Dad," she said. Her voice was even, not shaky. "There's a small problem." The flight attendant chuckled contemptuously. "Oh, calling Dad," she said, tilting her head as if watching a cheap comedy. "Do you think calling Dad will change anything?" Ava didn't reply. She only spoke into the phone. "They just tore up my ticket." There was a silence on the other end of the line. A very brief silence, but so heavy it felt as if half the air in the station had been sucked out. "Who the—" man's voice repeated, still low. But something had changed. Ava looked up. She looked directly at the silver name tag on the flight attendant's chest. "Margaret Collins," she said slowly. "Senior purser." Some people in the line started whispering. "That name sounds familiar." Margaret raised an eyebrow. "Listen, girl," she said, her voice impatient. "I don't know who your father is, and I don't care. You're disrupting the boarding process." Ava closed her eyes. For a second. In that moment, old images flooded back. A young black girl standing in a high-end store, being watched every move. A boardroom where she was the only one not allowed to make eye contact. A phrase repeated over and over again for years. "She doesn't look like a CEO." She was used to it. But today, something is different. Ava opened her eyes. She's not that little girl anymore. "Margaret," Ava said, her voice still low but firm as steel in a velvet lining. "You can check the system again. Or you can continue like this." "But you should know," Margaret interrupted. "I don't need to check anything," she said, holding up the torn ticket. "Because this is trash. Garbage." From there it hung, suspended in mid-air. Ava bent down, picking up each piece of days. 5. Paper. Those pieces of paper weren't just plain tickets. It was a contract, a right to move, an affirmation that she belonged. Ava stood up straight. "She just made a mistake," she said. Margaret laughed even louder. "Oh, what mistake?" Ava raised the phone and turned on the speakerphone. "Dad," she said. "They just closed the boarding gate." On the other end of the line, the man's voice was no longer gentle. "Which gate are you at?" "Gate C17. "Okay," he said. "Don't go anywhere. The call has ended." Margaret folded her arms. "The security is coming," she said, her voice assertive. "You should prepare yourself." Ava looked around. The faces that once smiled. The eyes that once avoided hers. The people who remained silent when she was humiliated. She took a deep breath. "No," Ava said softly. "You're the one who should be preparing." And somewhere deep within the airline system, something began to move. Ava Sterling stands still in front of gate C17. She neither stepped forward nor stepped back. Behind her, the first-class passengers began to murmur, not because of the delayed flight, but because of her appearance, someone unlike any of them. Ava was used to this feeling. It's like walking into a luxurious room and everything is silent, but you've just changed the atmosphere. She felt the eyes dart across her back. Quick, assessing, then averted. A man in a light, gray cashmere coat leaned his head towards the woman beside. Himand whispered something. The woman covered her mouth and giggled but still kept her eyes on Ava. Ava looked down at her worn-out sneakers. She chose them intentionally. It wasn't because she had no other options. It was because she was too tired of having to dress to please others. Inside the old canvas backpack, besides the laptop and notebook, there was also a thick envelope. Inside were the most important documents of the deal that she and her father had finalized just 3 days earlier. A deal worth over $3.2 billion. One deal that will change an entire airline. But nobody here knows that. And Ava had no intention of saying it. She doesn't need it. She used to stand in meeting rooms where everyone was wearing a three-piece suit, shiny Italian leather shoes. The watch was more expensive than her mother's first car, and even there she was still asked the same familiar question. Are you sure you're in charge of this project? Ava remembers very clearly the first time she heard that phrase. She was only 28 years old. She was the youngest black female CEO on the Forbes Under 40 list that year. The questioner was a gray-haired investor holding a glass of whiskey. He smiled. Not maliciously, just suspicious. It was the same look Margaret Collins had just given her. Margaret stood behind the boarding, gate her back straight, her chin slightly raised. She's the kind of person who's spent her whole life learning how to control space. 25 years as a flight attendant, 10 years as a senior purser. Margaret believed she could understand passengers with just a glance. And in her mind, Ava Sterling didn't belong here. Not because of skin color, not because of gender. At least that's what Margaret would say if asked. But it's because of images. First class is an enemy. Experience, Margaret once said during a new employee training session. And that experience needs to be protected. In Margaret's world, hoodies are not part of that experience. Margaret looked at Ava, then back at the boarding screen. Sterling's name and avatar are still visible. Seat 1A. The system did not report any errors. That annoyed Margaret. She'd seen plenty of scams in her career. Fake tickets, invalid upgrades, people deliberately pushing their way into areas that didn't belong to them, she said to herself. Not today. Not on my flight. What are you still doing standing here? Margaret said, her voice no longer feigned sweetness. We're boarding. Ava looked up. Yes, she replied. I know. Ava's voice was neither high nor low. A voice honed over many years, must be able to speak in front of people who are always waiting for you to make a mistake. Then get out of the way, Margaret said. You're blocking the way. Ava is not moving. It wasn't because she was stubborn. It was because she was used to. The idea that if you took one step back, others would push you 10 steps back. Margaret, Ava said slowly. I'm just asking you to follow the proper procedure. Scan the ticket. If it's invalid, I'll leave immediately. A brief silence. Margaret felt the crowd's gaze. She hated it. She hated being challenged in front of others, especially by someone who looked like Ava. Are you trying to teach me how to do the job? Margaret asked, her voice icy, cold. A man behind them chuckled softly. Who does she think she is? He said, not bothering to lower his voice. People these days are really reckless. Ava heard it. She could always hear it. Those words no longer hurt her as much as they used to. But they left a different mark, tired. She thought of her mother, a nurse who had worked night shifts for 15 years. Her mother once told her, you don't need to prove anything to anyone, but you must always know who you are. Ava knows who she is. She is the one who signed billion-dollar contracts with just a black panand, a calm nod. She was someone who had to learn not to react when insulted because reacting would be seen as overly emotional. She was someone who had to be strong in silence. But today that silence is being challenged. Margaret took the torn pieces of the ticket and threw them into the trash can behind the counter. That's it, she said. You're not flying on this flight. One breath, then another one. Ava bent down to pick up pieces of paper. She wasn't trembling, but her hands were cold. She looked up and stared directly at Margaret. Do you know, Ava said, what the greatest danger of small power is? Margaret raised an eyebrow. As the person who has it, Ava continued, I often think I don't need to take responsibility. Margaret laughed. Security is coming, she said. You should worry about yourself. Ava did not respond. She only glanced at the large screen above the gate. Flight SA-178 is still waiting, and somewhere within the mindless lines of code in Sterling Air's internal, the system a request has just been sent. Quiet, unpretentious, it's just a verification command. Margaret doesn't know yet, but she's about to find out. Gate C17 is no longer quiet. It wasn't, because of the announcements over the loudspeaker. It was because of the sighs, the clearing of the throats, the glances that were no longer concealed. The first-class crowd behind Ava Sterling began to shift, not forward. Rather, they leaned to the sides as if searching for a better vantage point, for an unexpected performance. Jason Miller stood just 2 steps away from Ava. He was about 50 years old, salt and pepper hair, a charcoal-colored cashmere coat, Italian leather shoes, polished so meticulously they reflected the ceiling lights. Jason had been flying first class for over 20 years. He was used to things going smoothly, used to not having to wait, and especially used to not having anyone standing between him and the spacious seat in front of him. Jason glanced at his watch. 3 minutes late. For him that was too many minutes. This is unbelievable, Jason said, his voice just loud enough for those around him to hear. One person disrupted the entire boarding process. Margaret Collins didn't turn around. But she heard clearly. And deep down she felt relieved. The crowd is on her side. Ava heard that. She didn't turn around. She learned very early on that if you react to every sarcastic remark, you won't have the energy left for the things that truly matter. But her body still betrayed her a little. Her shoulders tensed. Her hands tightened their grip on the backpack straps. She took a deep breath. Jason took a step forward. Could you please move aside? He said this time directly. We're running late for our flight, Ava returned. Just turn halfway, enough to look straight at him. You can wait, Ava said. Her voice was even, just like everyone else. Jason raised his eyebrows. He wasn't used to being spoken to like that. I'm not waiting for these kinds of games, he replied. Don't. You see, you're bothering all of us. Ava looked around. Some people bowed their heads, some people looked away, and some people nodded slightly. That nod hurt more than any words. Margaret turned. Around, sir, she said to Jason, her voice now sweet again. We are dealing with a security issue. Ava looked at Margaret. A security concern, she asked softly. Margaret didn't answer Ava. She just looked at Jason as if trying to reassure an important client. Security is on its way, Margaret said. Please be patient a little longer. Jason exhaled heavily. I've been flying with this airline for over 20 years, he said. I spend over $5,000 a year on tickets, and I've never seen anything as ridiculous as this. Ava felt a surge of heat in her chest. It wasn't anger. It was something more familiar. Injustice is spoken of confidently. She recalled the first time a journalist asked her during an interview, "Do you think you're in this position because of diversity policies?" The question was asked in a neutral tone as if it were a reasonable inquiry. Ava smiled and answered with numbers. But inside she saw a crack. Mr. Jason, Ava said, not raising her voice. You don't know who I am, and I don't know who you are. But that doesn't give you the right to treat me as an obstacle. Jason smirked. Rights, he repeated. The rights here belong to those who pay. A few muffled laughs could be heard from behind. Not big, but enough. Ava felt her heart beating faster. She didn't want to turn this into a speech. She just wanted to get on the plane, sit down, and finish what she needed to do. Margaret intervened. Miss Ava, she said, calling her by her name for the first time, but not with respect. You are causing a public disturbance. If you do not leave the boarding area immediately, we will be forced to call security. Ava looked directly at Margaret. She tore up my valid ticket, she said. She refused to check the system. And now, she calls that order. Margaret pursed her lips. She hated being told off in front of a crowd. You're overreacting, Margaret replied. We have standards. Standards for whom Ava asked. A moment of silence. Jason took another step forward. The distance between him and Ava was now less than a foot. "Didn't you understand?" he said, his voice low but sharp. "You don't belong here. That saying isn't new." But the way he said it, certainly without a doubt, made it more serious. Ava looked into Jason's eyes. She saw a man who didn't think he was doing anything wrong, and that is terrifying. "Please step back," Ava said. Her voice was lower. Jason didn't back down. Instead, he pulled his carry-on suitcase to the side, and in the process, the edge of the suitcase struck Ava's shoulder. Not strong enough to knock her down, but strong enough to send a message. Some people inhaled. Margaret opened her mouth, but not to mention Jason. "Sir, please continue boarding," she said, gesturing for Jason to move forward. Jason shrugged, as if it were all just a minor accident. Ava paused for a moment. She wasn't because it hurt. It was because it had just happened in front of so many people and nobody said anything. She felt her throat dry up. For a very brief moment she wondered, am I being too stubborn? Should I just ignore it? Buy another ticket and move on? She's done it before. Many times. But then she remembered the faces in her company. The young black employees looked at her as proof that they could stand anywhere. If she steps back today, what will they learn tomorrow? Ava stood upright. "He just touched me," she said, her voice steady, "and I need you to acknowledge that." Margaret looked at Ava, then at Jason. She chose. "You're imagining things," Margaret said. "Please leave the boarding area immediately. 1 beat, 2 beats. Ava nodded slightly. "Okay," she said. "Then I'll stay here. Until security arrives, and until the system tells the truth." Margaret folded her arms. "As you wish." But at that moment a strange sound came from above. It's not a loudspeaker. It's not a phone call. Instead, it was a short, sharp beep coming from the boarding control screen. Margaret spun around. The screen is flickering. The familiar lettering disappeared. Instead, she received an announcement she had never seen in her 25 years in the profession. Jason squinted, trying to read from a distance. Ava looked up. She didn't smile. She didn't show any sign of triumph. She simply exhaled very slowly. Because she knows things have just entered a new phase. The boarding control screen flashed once more. The beep sounded dry and short like a knock on a door Margaret Collins never thought she would have to open. She squinted and leaned closer to the screen. A new line of text appeared with a light yellow background and black letters, "Status check pending, do not proceed." Margaret stood still. Having worked in the airline industry for 25 years, she had seen all sorts of systemic failures, flight delays, wrong luggage, overbooking. But this announcement was unlike anything she had ever encountered. Jason Miller leaned forward. "What's the matter?" he asked, his voice growing. Impatient. Margaret stood tall. "It's just a technical glitch," she replied quickly, as if saying it sooner would make it true. "We'll fix it right away." Ava Sterling remained standing still. She didn't look at the screen for long. She had seen enough. What's happening is no longer about the plane tickets. It's a familiar reflex of the system being forced to stop and check itself. Margaret typed a few keys, then a few more. Nothing has changed. A drop of sweat trickled down the back of her neck, even though the station was kept at a cool temperature. Margaret looked up and met Ava's gaze. Not a challenging look, not a triumphant one. It's just a very still view. The look of someone accustomed to waiting. "What have you done?" Margaret asked, her voice lower. Ava shook her head. "I didn't do anything," she replied. "I just asked the system to do its job properly." Jason chuckled softly. "That sounds good," he said. "Now anyone can stand here and demand that the system listen to them." "Ava Quay," sang Jason. "Not everyone gets to hear," she said. "Only those who have the right." Jason frowned. "What are you implying?" Ava didn't reply. "She doesn't need it." Margaret sensed a crowd behind her beginning to stir. One person coughed lightly. Another checked their watch again. A couple exchanged annoyed glances. Those subtle reactions were something Margaret understood very well. They are signals, and that signal says, "Do something." Margaret took a deep breath. A decision was forming in her mind. It wasn't the right decision, but it was a familiar decision. "Kevin," Margaret called, turning to the young gatekeeper standing beside her. "Close the boarding gate." Kevin blinked. "Mrs. Margaret." "The system is close it." Margaret interrupted. I take responsibility. Kevin hesitated. He glanced at Ava, then at the screen, then at Margaret. But Sterling Margaret turned sharply. Are you asking me? A question she asked, her voice sharp as a knife. Kevin swallowed hard. No, ma'am. He returned to the keyboard. His fingers trembled slightly. A clicking sound was heard. The jet bridge doors began to slide back down. Slow, very slow. Ava watched the movement. She felt something tighten in her chest. It's not fear, it's disappointment. She made her choice, Ava thought. Margaret stood tall, her hands on the counter as if she had just reclaimed territory. The decision is final, she said, her voice louder. You're not flying on this flight. Jason breathed a sigh of relief. Finally, he muttered and pulled his suitcase forward. The jet bridge doors closed a little further. Ava was standing outside. 1 beat, 2 beats. She felt a cold breeze blowing through from the hallway. The familiar smell of metal and rubber. She can turn away. Right now. Call the assistant. Book another ticket. Fly on a later flight. No one can blame her. But Ava didn't move. She bent down and picked up the last ticket that she hadn't managed to grab earlier. A small piece of paper with unevenly torn edges. She smoothed it out with her thumb. Margaret, Ava said, her voice strangely calm. Are you sure? Margaret raised an eyebrow. Sure. Are you sure, Ava repeated, that you want this to end like this? Margaret gave a cold laugh. Do you think you're threatening me? Ava shook her head. No, she said. I'm just giving her another chance to do the right thing. Jason laughed even louder. Did you hear what I said? He said. It's amazing. Margaret turned to Jason, giving him a polite smile. Please continue boarding, she said. Jason nodded and took another step forward. But right then, another sound rang out. This time it wasn't from the gate. Screen! That's from the walkie-talkie attached to Margaret's shoulder. Gate C17, confirming the status of Flight SA-178. Margaret was startled. She raised her hand to the walkie-talkie. C-17 listening, she replied. We're dealing with a non-compliant passenger. There was a brief silence on the other end of the line. Then the voice spoke again. Please confirm. Is the passenger named Ava Sterling? Margaret frowned. Yes, she replied. But maintain the status quo, the voice interrupted. Do not close the gates. Do not continue. Boarding. Margaret stood still. Jason turned to look at her. What's the matter, he asked, his voice now lacking its initial confidence. Margaret didn't answer immediately. She looked at Ava. Ava said, nothing. She just stood there, her hands at her sides, her eyes fixed on Margaret. This is a request from management, the voice on the radio continued. We're on our way. Margaret felt her heart beating faster. What level of management? She asked. A moment of silence. Already executive operations. Jason swallowed. Executive, he repeated. What do you mean? Margaret did not answer. She turned back to the screen. The text on it has just changed. The background turned. A deep red. Prominent white lettering, boarding, halted, executive override. Margaret took a step back. Nobody said anything. The air inside the gate was thick and heavy. Ava took a slow breath in. Then she exhaled. She knew that when a large machine begins to stop, every small screw will have to face the truth. And Margaret Collinsworth standing right in front of it. Gate C17 was shrouded in an eerie silence. It wasn't the kind of peaceful silence. It was the kind of silence of people who had just realized they were standing very close to something far larger than themselves. The red text on the screen remained motionless. Boarding halted, executive override. Jason Miller read that line over and over in his head. He swallowed hard. Executive override, he muttered, as if speaking more softly would make it less frightening. Margaret Collins said nothing. She stood upright, but her shoulders had lost their initial firmness. Her hands resting on the counter trembled slightly, though she tried to hide it by clenching her fingers. 25 years. In 25 years of working, she had never once seen those words appear in her. Screen, Margaret Quay sang Kevin. Do something, she said, her voice more urgent. Call IT. Reset the system. Kevin shook his head. I don't have the authority, he replied, his voice low. It's locked at the executive level. Margaret felt a burning sensation rising in her throat. "What level of management?" she snarled. "I'm the senior purser here." Kevin didn't answer immediately. He looked at Ava Sterling. Just 1 second. But Margaret saw it. And that moment made her feel as if someone had just pulled the rug off her feet. Ava remained. Standing outside the jet bridge door, a cold wind blew through, gently rustling the hem of her hoodie. She neither stepped forward nor stepped backward. She looked at Margaret not with a triumphant gaze, but with something closer, to regret. Ava thought back to that initial moment. If Margaret only needs Toscan the ticket, just follow the correct procedure. Everything ended 10 minutes ago. But those in power rarely know when to stop. Jason spoke up, breaking the silence. "Listen," he said, trying to regain his composure. "We're all adults. Perhaps that Ava girl should apologize for causing trouble, and then everyone will move on." Ava turned to look at him. She stared for a long time. "He thinks Ava said that this happened because I didn't apologize quickly enough," Jason shrugged. "Sometimes," he replied, "knowing what's right is a life skill." Ava smiled slightly, a smile without joy. "He lived a whole life without that skill," she said. "And he thought everyone had the same privileges as him." Jason was about to reply, but Margaret raised her hand. "Enough," she said, her voice rising. "We're not here to debate morality. This is a security zone." Ava nodded. "That's right," she said. "And that's why everything she does here leaves a trace." Margaret felt her heart beating faster. She turned to the walkie-talkie again. "Executive Operations," she said. "This is Margaret Collins, Senior Purser at C17. I require immediate clarification of the situation." There was a longer silence than before. Then a voice came from the other end of the line, slow and very clear. "Your request has been noted," Margaret exhaled. "But you need to understand," the voice continued, "every decision at Gate C17 is being directly monitored." Margaret frowned. "Who is supervising?" she asked. One beat. Then the answer fell soft but heavy as a stone. "By the owner." No one spoke up. Jason stood frozen in place. "Owner," he whispered. "I mean," who Margaret felt her throat was dry and sore. "Sterling Air is a public company," she said quickly. "There's no Sterling Global completed the acquisition of a controlling stake 3 days ago," the voice interrupted. "The announcement was sent internally. 3 days ago." Margaret recalled that email, a long email with a generic subject line. She just skimmed through it, marked for later reading. Then, "Forget about it." "Margaret," sang Ava. This time she looked at her very carefully. "No longer a hoodie, no longer a pair of sneakers. It's about how Ava is standing. The way she remained silent when everyone around her lost their temper." A chilling thought ran down Margaret's spine. "Who are you?" she began. Ava didn't reply immediately. She bent down, picked up the last ticket, and placed it on the counter. "She asked me just now," Ava said, "who I am." Margaret swallowed. "And now," Ava continued, "she's beginning to understand why that question should have been asked sooner." Jason took half a step back. "Wait a minute," he said. "What do you mean?" Ava turned to him. "I mean," she said, "Mrs. Collins has made an irreversible decision." Margaret felt dizzy. "No," she said. I just followed the procedure." Ava shook her head. "No," she said. "She bypassed procedure. She tore up a valid contract. She allowed another passenger to touch me, and she tried to lock me out of the plane." Every sentence Ava spoke was clear and coherent. No anger, no judgment. "That's just the truth." Margaret opened her mouth, but no words came out. Footsteps sounded from behind. No need to rush, no need to be frantic, but it was enough to make people come back. A man in a pilot's uniformis, approaching the gate, baseball cap in hand, straight posture, serious gaze. "Gate C17, he asked. Kevin nodded immediately. "Yes, Captain." Jason looked at the badge on the man's shoulder and recognized him. "Captain." The man looked at Ava. Then he looked at Margaret. Then, "Look at the red screen." "We have a problem," he said. Ava took a slow breath. She knew that once the captain left the cockpit, things had spiraled out of control for those standing there. Margaret felt her knees go weak. She gripped the edge of the counter tightly. "Captain Wright," she said, trying to keep her voice normal. This is just Captain Daniel Wright raises his hand. Mrs. Collins, he said, his voice low and clear. We'll talk later. He turned to Ava. Miss Sterling, he said, and those two words silenced the entire gate. I need you to come with me. Jason's jaw dropped. Margaret stood still. Ava nodded. She didn't smile. She took just one step, crossing the invisible boundary that Margaret had been trying to maintain. The jet bridge door stopped midway. Not closed, not fully open, just like this situation. Ava turned around. She looked at Margaret one last time. Here, Ava said, softly, is the moment you can stop. Margaret did not answer. She continued walking. And somewhere, far from Gate C17, another man was stepping out of a private elevator. His phone still in his hand. He looked at the screen. Then he said just one sentence, let me handle it. Gate C17 no longer resembles a boarding area at this point. It was like a makeshift courtroom. No gavel, no judge. Only glances and a truth that is slowly being revealed remain. Captain Daniel Wright stood next to Ava Sterling, his posture upright, his shoulders broad, his face expressionless. Miss Sterling, he said softly, just loud enough for her to hear. We've been instructed to maintain the status quo. Ava nodded. Thank you, Captain, she replied. That's all I needed. Margaret Collins stood on the other side of the counter, her hands gripping the metal edge tightly. She felt as though the entire gate was tilting toward her. Captain Wright, Margaret said, trying to regain her professional tone. I'm in charge here. If there's a problem, please talk to me. The captain turned to look at her. He stared for a long time. We will talk, he said. But not in the way you think, Jason Miller chimed. That's ridiculous, he said, his voice beginning to lose control. One passenger causes a disturbance and then the whole flight is delayed. Ava Quay sang Jason. Do you still think this is causing a disturbance? She asked. Jason forced a smile. What do you call it? Ava didn't reply immediately. She took out her phone again. The screen is still displaying the previous call. It hasn't been disconnected. She gently tapped the speakerphone icon. A small, clicking sound was heard. A familiar, deep male. Voice filled the space around the gate. Daniel, the voice said. Have you met her yet, Captain Daniel Wright? Stood up straight. Yes, sir, he replied. Miss Sterling is here. No one moved. Margaret's eyes widened. Jason kept turning his head as if trying to pinpoint where the voice was coming from. Ava held the phone up to chest level. I'm here, Dad, she said. I'm fine. There was a brief silence. Then the man's voice softened. Are you sure? He asked. I heard your ticket isn't intact anymore. Ava looked down at the pieces of paper on the counter. No more, she said. But that's not what worries me most. Margaret swallowed. Excuse me, she interrupted, her voice trembling. More than she intended. May I ask? Who are you, Ava? Didn't answer on his behalf. On the other end of the line, the man took a slow breath. Marcus Sterling, he said, chairman of the board of Sterling Air. Some people inhale deeply. Jason Miller stood, frozen in place. Chairman, he whispered. Margaret felt as if someone was draining the blood from her face. That's impossible, she stammered. Sterling, ere the transfer of controlling shares was completed on Friday. Marcus Sterling continued, his voice low, but each word clear. I believe the HR department has sent the notification. Margaret recalled that email. She remembers it very clearly, and this time she wished she had read more carefully. Jason took a step back. Wait a minute, he said, the voice beginning to tremble. You mean, Shehe pointed. Toward a vase. She's my daughter, Marcus said, and she's the CEO of Sterling Global. 1 beat. 2 beats. Nobody said anything. A woman in the first class line covered her mouth with her hand. Another person looked down at their phone as if wanting to disappear. Ava stood still. She wasn't enjoying this moment. She never had. Dad, Ava said, her voice softer. I don't want this to become a performance. I know, Marcus replied. But you also know there are times when silence is no longer an option. Marcus paused for a moment. Margaret Collins, he said. Is she still there? Margaret was startled. Yes. Yes, sir, she replied, her hands trembling so much that she had to cling to the counter to stay steady. Can you explain to me, Marcus said, Why my daughter's valid ticket was torn up in front of dozens of witnesses. Margaret opened her mouth. Then close it. I was just following procedure, she said weakly. Which process? Marcus asked. Protection. Process protecting the first-class experience. A long silence. Very long. Do you know, Marcus said slowly, what really destroys the experience? Margaret did not answer. It's humiliating, Marcus continued. It's humiliating for a black woman to stand before a crowd and be told she doesn't belong there. Jason bowed his head. Sir, he said, trying to salvage some last shred of dignity, I think everything has been misunderstood. We could, all Marcus interrupted. Who are you? He asked. Jason froze. I'm Jason Miller, he said. A loyal customer. Did you touch my daughter? Marcus asked directly. Jason opened his mouth. No. I mean, it was just a minor collision. The answer is yes or no, Marcus asked again. Jason remained silent. Captain Daniel Wright spoke up. It was recorded by camera, he said. The collision was unnecessary. Marcus let out a sigh. Thank you, Daniel, he said. Then his voice turned more serious. Mr. Miller, you will not be flying this flight. Jason's eyes widened. You can't do that, he said. I spend tens of thousands of dollars a year. Not anymore, Marcus replied. And the legal department will contact. Hit you. Jason stepped back. Margaret felt like she was falling. Apart. Margaret Collins. Marcus said, his voice low but cold. You have abused your power. You have breached the shipping contract. And you have put this company at serious legal risk. Margaret burst into tears. I'm sorry, she said. I didn't know. Not knowing is a choice, Marcus said. And today she chose not to know. Ava closed her eyes for a second. She didn't want to see this, but she knew this was the price of the grude. Truth, Dad, Ava said. I want to talk to you in person. Okay, Marcus replied. Dad's on his way. The call has ended. The space around the gate seemed to collapse. Jason Miller was asked to leave the line. Margaret Collins stood there, tears streaming down her face, but no one saw her as a person of power anymore. Ava Quay sang Captain Wright. Thank you, she said. He nodded. The flight will wait, he replied. We have time. Ava looked up. At the red screen. She knew it was just the beginning, and when Marcus Sterling walks into this station, no one will be able to pretend this never happened. No one at Gate C17 said another word. It's not because they have nothing left to say. Rather, it's because they're beginning to understand that every word spoken now could become evidence. Ava Sterling stood beside the boarding gate, her hands clasped together in front of her stomach. She looked down at the cold marble floor. The gray veins stretched out like parallel paths that would never meet. She inhaled, then exhaled. She felt neither relief nor victory. It was just a familiar feeling of emptiness, the feeling after the truth has been spoken aloud. Margaret Collins was still, standing there. No more folded arms, no more chin held high. Her shoulders slumped as if the entire weight of 25 years had fallen upon her back in a single afternoon. Captain Daniel Wright whispered, Maintain the status quo. No one else boarding. Kevin nodded. Immediately, Jason Miller was asked to step out of line. He stood a few steps away, his face flushed, his phone pressed tightly to his ear, but no one could hear what he was saying. The remaining passengers didn't dare look at Ava any longer. Not because of fear, but because of shame. A middle-aged woman who had laughed when Jason made his sarcastic remark bowed her head, her fingers twisting the strap of her handbag. Another man kept adjusting his tie as if simply straightening it would restore everything to normal. But nothing is normal anymore. Footsteps echoed from afar. No rush, no hurry. With a steady, confident pace, they moved closer and closer through the wide corridors of the station. A few people turned, two around. Then a few more people joined. Ava looked up. She recognized that gate immediately. Marcus Sterling is in no hurry. He was tall, wearing a perfectly tailored dark gray suit, unpretentious, no logos, just the absolute perfect fit. Two men followed him, each carrying a D's thin briefcase. Lawyers. No introductions needed. Marcus walked into the gate area as if it rightfully belonged to him. No one stopped him. No one asked for a ticket. Margaret Collins saw him, and her heart skipped a beat. It wasn't because he looked scary. It was because he looked calm. Marcus didn't look at Margaret right away. He looked at Ava first. "Are you all right?" he asked, his voice low and warm. Ava nodded. "I'm fine," she replied. "Just a little tired." Marcus placed his hand on his daughter's shoulder, a very gentle touch. "I'm sorry," he said. "I should have been here sooner." Ava shook her head. "No," she said. "I need to stand here by myself." Marcus looked at his daughter for another second. Then he turned to Margaret. Collins. His eyes were devoid of sharpness. There was no anger. It was simply the look of someone accustomed to making decisions without raising their voice. "Are you Margaret Collins?" he asked. Margaret swallowed. "Yes, sir," she replied, her voice trembling. "How long have you worked for Sterling Air?" Marcus asked. 25 years, Margaret said quickly, as if that number could protect her. Marcus nodded. 25 years, he repeated. "That's a long time." He looked around the gate. "During those 25 years, he continued, how many people did you represent this company?" To Margaret opened her mouth, then closed it again. "So much," she whispered. Marcus nodded again, and today he said in front of many witnesses, "She decided that my daughter does not belong here." Margaret shook her head repeatedly. "I didn't know she was his daughter," she said. "If I had known." Marcus raised his hand. "Listen to me," he interrupted, his voice still calm. "You're not treating my daughter badly because she's my daughter." He paused. "She treated him badly because she, though the didn't deserve it." That sentence landed on the gate heavier than any shout. Margaret burst into tears. I was just trying to uphold the standard," she said. "First class it's a service," Marcus said, "not a moral club." He turned to Captain Wright. "Daniel," Marcus said, "your report." "There were procedural violations," Daniel replied. "Tearing a valid ticket, refusing system authentication, allowing another passenger unsafe access." Marcus nodded. "Thank you." He returned to Margaret. "Do you understand? Marcus said that those actions put this company at serious legal risk." Margaret nodded repeatedly. "Yes, I get it." Marcus stared at her for a long time. "So do you. Understand," he continued, "that the worst thing isn't the legal risk." Margaret looked up, her eyes red and swollen. "The worst thing," Marcus said, "is that she Madee woman wonder if she had the right to stand here." Ava turned away. She didn't want Margaret to see. Their eyes were wet. Marcus took a deep breath. "Margaret Collins," he said, "I'm asking you to hand over your badge and employee ID." Margaret was stunned. "Right now?" she asked, her voice breaking. "Right now," Marcus replied. Margaret tremblingly removed the silver badge from her breast pocket. A small metallic sound echoed as it hit the counter. The employee ID card was placed nearby. A small symbol of power has just lost its meaning. "She has been suspended from her duties effective immediately," Marcus said. "The final decision will be made after I hear the full story from my daughter." Margaret slumped into the back seat. Jason Miller, standing a distance away, opened his mouth to say something, but Marcus's gaze swept over him, silencing him. Marcus Quay sang Ava. "How do you want to handle this?" he asked. Everyone at the gate held their breath. Ava looked around, the faces, the eyes. She looked at Margaret, a woman who had once stood in a position of power and was now left with only fear. Ava took a deep breath. She knew Thather next decision would not only speak volumes about who she was, but would also shape the culture of an entire airline. "I need time," Ava said, slowly. "I don't want to make a decision while everyone's watching." Marcus nodded. "A wise decision," he said. He turned to Captain Wright. "Daniel," Marcus said, "keep the flight here. We're not going anywhere until everything is sorted out." "Understood," Daniel replied. Marcus placed his hand on Ava's shoulder again. "You did very well," he said softly. Ava did not respond. She looked up at the red screen again. She knew the climax wasn't over. Yet, it has just transformed into a different form. Gate C17 was quietly sealed off. There were no yellow armbands. There were no police officers on guard. There was an eerie silence, as if everyone understood this was no longer just about a flight. First-class passengers were invited to sit down. No one complained anymore. Jason Miller sat in a seat against the wall, his eyes fixed on the floor, his phone lying motionless in his hand like a useless object. Margaret Collins was sitting not far away. Her hands rested on her knees. clasped tightly together. Her fingernails were white. She stopped crying. Crying was the initial reaction. Now all that remains is the emptiness of someone who has just really all the walls that protected them have crumbled. Marcus Sterling signals to Captain Wright. "Give us a few minutes," he said. Captain Wright nodded and stepped back with Kevin and the flight crew. Gate C17 became isolated like an invisible, sealed room. Marcus Quay sang. "Ava, do you want to talk here?" he asked. "Or in the meeting?" Room Ava looked around. Their faces were avoiding her gaze. They had just witnessed something they weren't sure they were prepared to confront. "Here," Ava said. "They need to hear." Marcus nodded. He didn't object. He knew his daughter wasn't seeking revenge. She was looking for change. Ava took a step forward. "Don't stand on a platform. Don't take center stage. Just stand tall enough so everyone can hear." "You," Margaret Ava said. Margaret looked up. Her eyes were red, but no longer defiant. "Yes," she replied. Ava took a deep breath. "She's worked here for 25 years, she said. "She's seen all kinds of people." Margaret nodded slowly. "Yes. So tell me," Ava continued, "in those 25 years, how many times did you treat a passenger different simply because they weren't like the people you were used to serving?" Margaret bowed her head. "That quest cannot be answered." Quickly. She began then. Stopped. The silence was prolonged. Ava didn't rush. She learned that the right questions don't need to be forced to be answered. "I didn't count," Margaret said finally. "But there are many. A few." Deep breaths could be heard from behind. Ava nodded. "Thank you for your honesty," she said. Marcus looked at his daughter, a hint of hidden pride in his eyes. "Do you know," Ava continued, "why I didn't introduce my from the beginning?" Margaret looked up confused. "No," she replied. "Because I don't want to," Ava said, treated kindly just because of the name Sterling. She paused for a moment. "I want to know," she continued, "whether a black woman wearing a hoodie is treated fairly when no one knows who she is." Jason Miller is the translator. He didn't lift his head, but his ears turned red. "And today," Ava said, "I have the answer." Margaret closed her eyes. "You hate me," she said, her voice hoarse. "Don't you?" Ava shook her head. "No," she replied. "I hate this happening. I hate that I'm not surprised at all." That statement struck harder than any accusation. Margaret opened her eyes. "What do you want from me?" she asked. "Fire me. Use me as an example." Marcus shifted slightly, but Ava raised her hand. "Dad," she whispered. "Let me speak." Marcus nodded, taking half a step back. Ava looked at Margaret. "I don't want her to disappear," Ava said. "And I don't want her to continue standing where she can hurt others." Margaret frowned. "So, what do you want me to do?" she asked. Ava was silent for a moment. "This is the hardest part. No MBA curriculum teaches how to answer this question. Do you think," Ava asked slowly, "that you've ever truly listened to someone you considered not to belong?" Margaret pondered. "A very long time. I'm not sure," she said. "Maybe not yet." Ava nodded. "So I want you to start from there," she said. Margaret looked up confused. "I didn't decide whether she would be fired today or not," Ava said. "But I decided she wouldn't be returning to this position." Margaret swallowed. "She's leaving. First class," Ava continued, leaving her control role. "And if she wants to continue working at Sterling Air, she'll have to relearn everything from a lower position." A few hushed whispers could be heard. Jason Miller finally lifted his head. "Is this a joke?" he said. "You're talking about someone's career," Ava Quay sang Jason. "And he," she said, "spoke of my dignity as an inconvenience." Jason opened his mouth. "Then close it." Ava returned to Margaret. "She won't be erased," Ava said. "But she also won't be protected by her name anymore." Margaret trembled. "What do you think I'll learn from being brought down?" she asked. Ava replied immediately. "She'll learn," she said, "what it feels like to be on the other side." A deep silence. Marcus looked at Ava, his gaze becoming serious. "Are you sure?" he asked softly. "You don't owe her that." Ava Quay sang cha. "I'm not doing this for her," she said. "I'm doing it for the people who will be standing here after me." Marcus nodded. "He understands." Margaret Collins, Marcus said, stepping forward. "My provisional decision is as follows." Everyone held their breath. "She will be transferred to a passenger-free department," he said, "while an internal investigation is underway." No management authority. No decision-making authority. Margaret closed her eyes. And then Marcus continued, "We'll consider whether she deserve Asa. Second chance." Margaret opened her eyes. She looked at Ava. "I was wrong," she said. "And I don't expect you to forgive me." Ava nodded. "Forgiveness," she said, "is not what I'm talking about." She looked around the gate. "Responsibility is what's important." Marcus placed his hand on Ava's shoulder. "We'll continue the rest in the control room," he said. Ava nodded. But before leaving, she turned back to look at Margaret one last time. "She's still here," Ava said. "But she'll have to learn why." Margaret did not answer. She just bowed her head. Ava walked away. And as the control room door closed behind her, a question lingered in the air of Gate C17. Can justice be both tough enough and humane? Sterling Air's operations office is located on the top floor. No large windows. No flashy lighting. It's simply an enclosed space where real decisions are made when no one needs to perform anymore. Ava Sterling sat down in a dark brown leather chair. The chair felt slightly cold against her back. She leaned back and closed her eyes for a few seconds, for the first time since. Entering Gate C17, she allowed herself to breathe slowly. Marcus Sterling sat opposite him. He placed his briefcase on the table but didn't open it immediately. "Are you all right?" he asked again. Ava nodded, but this time more slowly. "I think it's okay," she said, "but I also know that things won't stop there." Marcus smiled slightly. "You're just like your mother," he said, "always seeing the next wave before it hits." Ava opened her eyes. "Dad," she said, "this will spread very quickly." Marcus nodded. "It's already gone viral," he replied. "The communications office just reported it. At least 10 passengers have posted videos." Ava closed her eyes again. She wasn't surprised. Gate C17 is full of telephones. Those tiny devices have become witness esto the times. "Is Dad ready?" Ava asked. "Not just for the press, but for internal matters as well." Marcus opened the briefcase. Inside were reports, numbers, printed emails. "I've been preparing for this for a long time," he said. "I just didn't expect it to start with you." Ava looked at him. "Does Dad regret it?" she asked. Marcus shook his head. "No," he replied immediately. "If not today, then another day. And perhaps the person standing at Gate C17 then wouldn't be as calm as you." Ava bowed her head. She thought of Margaret Collins, of the panic in her eyes when power slipped from her grasp. "Do you think," Ava said slowly, "she'll actually change?" Marcus was silent for a moment. "Not everyone will change," he said. "But our responsibility is not to guarantee results. It is to create the conditions." Ava nodded. She learned that from a very young age. The door to the control room opened gently. A young woman walked in. She was wearing a gray blazer, anthen-rimmed glasses. "Mr. Sterling," she said, "the media is getting heated." Marcus gestured for her to continue. "Two hashtags are trending," she said. "Number Gate C17 and number Flying While Black." Ava opened her eyes wide. She knows that hashtag. She saw it. She heard it. She lived through it. "Major news outlets are contacting us," the woman continued. "They want official comment." Marcus looked at Ava. "Do you want to speak?" he asked. Ava thought for a moment. Part of her wanted to refuse, wanted to remain silent, wanted to let things die down on their own. But she also knew that silence could sometimes be a form of complicity. "I will tell you," Ava said, "but not right now." Marcus nodded. "Okay," he said. "We'll issue a short statement first." The woman took quick notes. "There's one more thing," she said. "There's a request from the Human Resources Department." Marcus frowned. "Margaret Collins," the woman said. "She wants to see Ava Sterling, privately." Ava looked up. Now she asked. "As soon as possible," the woman replied. She said, "She needs to say something before it's too late." Marcus looked at his daughter. "You don't need to see him," he said. "I'll handle it." Ava shook her head. "I will meet her," she said. "Not because of her, because of me." Marcus looked at Ava for a long time. Then he nodded. "I'll leave the room next door. Empty," he said. "I'll stay right here." Margaret Collins sat on a hard chair in the small conference room. No windows, no paintings on the walls. There was only a wooden table and two chairs facing each other. She was no longer in uniform, just a thin jacket and dark trousers. When Ava walked in, Margaret jumped to her feet. "Miss Sterling," she said, her voice trembling. "Thank you," for Ava raised her hand. "Sit down," she said softly. "We don't need to be formal." Margaret sat down. Her hands rested on the table, trembling noticeably. Ava sat opposite. A moment of silence. She said she needed to see me, Ava said, for what Margaret swallowed. I checked my phone, she said. Social media, text messages. Ava said nothing. "I'm becoming an icon," Margaret continued, her voice choking. "An ugly one." Ava looked at her. "She's not a symbol," she said. "She's a human being who did something wrong." Margaret burst into tears. "I don't think I'm a discriminatory person," she said. "I really don't think so." Ava nodded. "Most people think that way," she said. "That's why it keeps happening." Margaret wiped away her tears. "I told my husband," she said. "I told my daughter. She asked me, 'Mom, do you think I don't belong somewhere?'" Margaret choked up. "I can't answer that." Ava felt a slight pain in her chest. "It's not pity. It's awareness." "What do you want from me?" Ava asked. Margaret took a deep breath. "I'm not asking for forgiveness," she said. "I just want, if possible, I want to do something to prevent it from happening again." Ava remained silent. "This is the bottleneck. Not online, not in the media, but in this small room. Are you willing," Ava asked slowly, "to be seen the way you've seen others?" Margaret nodded immediately. "Yes," she said, "even though it hurts." Ava stood up. "Then let's start from there," she said. "Not today, but soon." Margaret looked up. "Will you give me a chance?" she asked. Ava did not respond directly. "Opportunity," she said, "is not a gift. It is a responsibility." Ava turned away, her hand resting on the doorknob. "And she will have to prove every day that she deserves it." Ava stepped outside. Margaret sat alone. For the first time in years, she didn't know who she would be tomorrow. At Gate C17 flight, SA 178 has not yet departed. But the story has spread far and wide, on the phones of millions of people, in the memories of those who witnessed it. And within the heart of an airline, there is a need for self-reflection. The press conference room wasn't large, no elevated stage, no harsh spotlights. A simple wooden platform, the Sterling Air logo behind it, and rows of closely spaced seats were already full very early on. Ava Sterling was standing backstage. She heard that familiar sound, the clicking of a camera, soft whispers, the rustling of paper, the voice of public opinion. Marcus Sterling stood beside his daughter. He said nothing. He simply placed his hand on her shoulder once more. "You don't have to bear all the burden," he said softly. "I'm here." Ava took a deep breath. "I know," she replied, "but I need to step out on my own." Marcus nodded. He took half a step back. The door opened. Light streamed in. Ava stepped forward to the podium. She wasn't wearing an expensive suit, just a dark blazer, a white t-shirt underneath, and her hair neatly tied back. No jewelry, no symbols of power. The room fell silent. "Thank you everyone for coming," Ava said. Her voice was clear, not shaky. Several hands went up immediately. Ava raised her hand. Slightly. Before answering the question, she said, "I want to say one thing." She stopped. "What happened at Gate C17 wasn't an isolated incident," Ava said. "It was a moment that many Black Americans experience in different ways." A few keyboard clicks could be heard. "The only difference," she continued, "is that this time it's being filmed." A journalist stood up. "Miss Sterling," he said, "there are people who think this is an abuse of power, that you and your father punished an employee for a personal mistake." Ava nodded. "That's a legitimate question," she said, "and I want to answer it directly." She looked around the room. "No one was punished because they didn't know who I was," Ava said. "People were held accountable for treating me as if I didn't belong." Another journalist raised their hand. "So is the decision regarding Margaret Collins final?" she asked. "Is she being fired?" Ava shook her head. "Not yet," she replied, "and probably not." The room buzzed with activity, Ava continued. We are conducting a comprehensive internal review, she said. Not just about an individual, but about the culture. She paused for a moment. Firing someone might make us feel like everything is resolved, Ava said. But it doesn't change the system that allowed it to happen. A reporter in the back spoke up. Aren't you afraid of a backlash? He asked. Some first-class customer shave already announced they will boycott Sterling. Ava smiled very slightly. We didn't build Sterling. On the fear of losing customers, she said. We built it on respect. She looked directly into the camera. And if someone feels that respect is too much to ask for, then perhaps they are not the kind of customer we want to serve. A silence spread. Marcus Sterling, standing behind, nodded slightly. Another reporter stood up. Do you think he asked that the fact you're a black CEO makes this story politicized? Ava tilted her head. This story has been political for a long time, she said. It's just that it wasn't called that before. Several people in the room let out a heavy sigh. The fact that I'm a black CEO, Ava continued, doesn't create a problem. It just makes it impossible for people to ignore it anymore. A young journalist raised his hand, his voice slightly trembling. Can you tell me, she asked, about how you felt standing at Gate C17 at that moment? Ava remained silent. This question was not included in the preparation. She thought of the cold wind, of the torn ticket, of Margaret's gaze, of Jason Miller's soft laughter. It feels so familiar, Ava said slowly. And that's the saddest thing. The room was completely silent. I've stood in places like that before, she continued. Before business cards, before titles. She took a deep breath. And I know Ava said that if I turn my back, someone else will take my place, and they probably won't have anyone to call. Some people bowed their heads. Marcus looked at his daughter, his eyes silent. This isn't my story, Ava concluded. It's the story of who is believed to belong before they even open their mouths. Ava took a step back. Thank. She left the stage amidst a flurry of camera clicks. The press conference ended, but the impact lingered. Within hours, the video went viral on social media. Evening programs begin with Gate C17. Experts debated. Hashtags exploded. Number flying while black. Number Gate C17. Number belonging. In the sky, Ava sat in the car, watching the city go by outside the window. The phone was vibrating. Constantly. Messages from strangers. I used to be her. Thank you for not staying silent. Finally, someone has spoken up. Ava put the phone down. She didn't feel light. It just feels heavier. Marcus looked at his daughter. My son has just become an icon, he said. Ava exhaled. I never asked for that, she replied. Marcus nodded. No one asked for it, he said. But there are people who have to bear the burden. The car stopped. In front of them was the Sterling Air headquarters. Ava stepped down. She knew that from today onwards, every decision she made would be scrutinized under a harsher light, and somewhere, Margaret Colinsis, sitting alone reading every comment, every line that mentions her name. The story isn't over yet. It has only just come into the spotlight. 3 days after Gate C17, Ava Sterling woke up at 5:12 a.m. No alarm, no ringtone. It was just a familiar feeling, pressing gently on my chest, as my body woke up before. I even realized it. Her apartment overlooked the Chattahoochee River. The Atlanta sunrise was slow, its bluish-gray light filtering through the thin curtains. Ava sat up, her feet touching the cold floor. The phone was on the bedside table. The screen lit up the moment. She picked it up. Over 300 unread notifications. She didn't open it. She learned that not every call needs to be answered immediately. Ava makes coffee. The machine hummed steadily, an everyday sound that helped her stay. Grounded in reality, she leaned against the kitchen counter, watching the steam rise. In her mind, Gate C17 hadn't disappeared yet. Not a big picture, not a newsworthy moment, but they are the small details. The look in the first-class woman's eyes. When Ava said, I'm used to it, Jason Miller turned away very quickly when his name was mentioned. And that was Margaret Collins's face when, for the first time, no one listened to her anymore. The phone vibrates. This time, Ava looked. Mom calling. Ava closed her eyes for a second. Then she picked up the phone. Mom, she said. Ava, her mother's voice was low and warm. Did you sleep well? Ava smiled slightly. It's all right, she replied. They're talking about you on TV, her mother said. They're saying, you're very brave. Ava leaned against the counter. What do you think, Mom? She asked. There was a silence on the other end of the line. I think her mother said slowly, you did the right thing. But doing the right thing doesn't mean it won't hurt. Ava closed her eyes. I'm worried about you, her mother continued. Not because of the people who hate you, but because the people who love you will expect more. Ava exhaled. I've been thinking about that too, she said. You don't need to carry the weight of the world on your shoulders, her mother said. You just need to be true to yourself. The call has ended. Ava stood still for a long time. She knew her mother was right, but she also knew that once she stepped into the light, the darkness wouldn't let her go easily. At Sterling Air headquarters, the atmosphere changed. Noticeably. No more noise, no more tension. But be more careful. The conversations stopped when Ava walked past. It wasn't because they were afraid. It was because people weren't sure what to say. A middle manager caught up with Ava in the hallway. Miss Sterling, he said, there are some staff members who would like to share their experiences. Ava stopped. There's no need for a big meeting, she said. Give them a safe space, and make sure no one gets retaliated. Against. The manager nodded, his expression softening. Slightly. On another floor, Margaret Collins was sitting in the Human Resources office. No phone, no email. It's just a stack of internal investigation notes. She read each line. Inappropriate language. Assumptions based on appearance. Rejected verification process. Those cold words describe her better than any accusation. Her phone rang. A message from my daughter. Is Mom okay? Margaret stared at the screen for a long time. Then answer. Mom is studying. In the afternoon, Ava attended a closed-door meeting with the leadership team. No press, no filming. They are simply faces accustomed to power, and now they have to learn to listen. We need concrete action, one person said. Not just declarations, Ava nodded. Yes, she said. And that action will upset some people. No one objected. We're going to change the training, Ava continued. Not just about service, but about bias. One person frowned. That will take time. Ava looked straight ahead. Discrimination has existed for a very long time, she said. Time is no longer an excuse. A moment of silence. Then another person spoke up. You know, he said some shareholders don't like this. Ava nodded. I know, she replied, but I'm not here to make everyone comfortable. That evening, Ava sat alone in her apartment. The city lights up. She opened her laptop. Not social media, not news. An unsent email appears on the screen. Title, To the Girl in the Hoodie. Ava reread what she had. Written, You may never read this, but I want you to. Know you were right to stand still. You were right not to apologize just to get away with it. Ava stopped. She thought of all the girls in hoodies who had walked faster, spoken more softly, apologized sooner just to avoid trouble. She deleted the email. Not sent. Some things don't need to be said direct to be valuable. The phone vibrated again. Message from Marcus Sterling. You did a great job, but don't forget to rest. Ava smiled. She put the phone down, step out onto the balcony. The night breeze was cool. She looked down at the cars below. Each car tells its own story. And she knew that Gate C17's story was creeping into many other stories. Not as a moral lesson, but as a question. Am I staying silent when? I shouldn't be. Ava placed her hand on the railing. She didn't know where things would lead. She only knew that from the moment she didn't turn away at Gate C17, her life had taken a different turn. And the price of not remaining silent is not hatred. Rather, it is a responsibility. Continue speaking out even when we are tired. Somewhere in the city, Margaret Collins is also awake. Two women, two different paths. But they both face the same question. Who will I become after this moment? 3 months have passed. Not too fast. Not too slow. But it takes long enough for what is burning tow begin to settle and leave behind ashes. At Sterling Air, everything looks the same from a distance. The plane still took off on time. The check-in counter was still brightly lit. The staff were still smiling, but if you look closer, you'll see subtle changes creeping into every corner. No more harmless jokes. No more judgmental glances that scan you from head to toe before looking at your ticket. It's not because everyone suddenly becomes perfect. Because they knew they were being watched. Ava Sterling walked through the training area on a Monday morning. The room was spacious, with chairs arranged in a circle. No podium, no PowerPoint slides. It's just people and their stories. A coach stands in the middle of the court room. Not a professional speaker. She's a former flight attendant. She has a tan complexion. A deep voice. "We're not here to learn how to smile more beautifully," he said. "We're here to learn how not to hurt any when the cameras aren't rolling." Ava stood in the background, unintroduced, unnoticed. She wanted to see things function when she wasn't in charge. A young flight attendant raised her hand. "I'm afraid I'll say something wrong," she said. "I'm afraid of being labeled." The coach nodded. "Fear." "He is good," he replied. "It means you're paying attention." Ava smiled very slightly. This is not a victory, but this is just the beginning. On the other side of the city, Margaret Collins stood in a warehouse. No neat uniforms, no shiny name tags. It was just an orange reflective vest, thick gloves, and the smell of machine oil. She works in the internal logistics department. No contact with passengers, no decision-making. It's just work. Line up. Check. Take notes. Her back hurts. Her hands were rough. But what tired her the most wasn't her body. Instead, it was silence. Nobody was afraid of her. Nobody flattered her. Some people didn't know who she was. And it was the first time in years that Margaret had been treated like a normal person. One afternoon, she sat eating alone. A young girl walked over. "Are you Margaret?" she asked hesitantly. Margaret looked up. "Yes," she replied. The girl sat down. "I was at Gate C17 that day," she said. "I didn't record any video, but I saw everything." Margaret held her breath. "I've hated you," the girl said bluntly. "For a while." Margaret nodded. "That makes sense," she said. The girl remained silent, but she continued. "I've also never seen anyone like you stay on to take responsibility." Margaret bowed her head. "I don't know if I deserve it," she said. The girl stood up. "I don't know either," she said, "but I think running away would be worse." She left. Margaret sat down. For the first time, she didn't feel condemned, just seen. Ava Sterling stood on her office balcony late one afternoon. The city of Atlanta is bathed in the colors of the sunset. Marcus Sterling stood next to her. "Do you see it?" he asked. Ava nodded. "I see," she said. "But I also see how fragile everything is." Marcus smiled. "Change is always fragile," he said. "But that's no reason not to start." Ava remained silent. "Are you tired?" Marcus asked. Ava exhaled. "Yes," she said. "But I don't regret it." Marcus placed his hand on the railing. "I'm proud of you," he said. "Not because you're the CEO, but because you stood still when someone told you to step aside." Ava closed her eyes. She recalled Gate C17, cold wind, a torn ticket. The moment she decided not to apologize just to have peace. "Dad," Ava said, "I'm afraid that one day I'll become numb." Marcus turned to look at his daughter. "The day you're no longer afraid of it," he said, "that will be the dangerous day." That evening, Ava received an email. No flowery titles, no lengthy signatures, just one line. "I have completed the internal training. Of course, if I have the opportunity, I would like to share what I have learned. Margaret." Ava read it twice. She didn't answer immediately. She closed her laptop. Go out onto the balcony. The night breeze is cooler. She thought about forgiveness. It's not about erasing the past. It's about allowing the future to escape its confines. A few days later, during a small training session, Ava sat in the back row. Margaret Collins is standing in the front. No microphone, no podium. She was trembling. "I'm not standing here because I'm a good example," Margaret said. "I'm standing here because I've done wrong things and thought I was right." The room was silent. "I used to think power was about holding doors," she said. "Now I know it's about knowing when to open them." Ava bowed her head. No one applauded. "And that's the right thing to do. Change happens quietly. There were no cinematic moments. These are just the days when people start thinking a second before acting. It's just that these questions were asked sooner. And somewhere a woman in a hoodie boarded the plane. Nobody told her to stand aside. 1 year after Gate C17. No more hashtags. No more cameras pointed at you. No more noisy debates in evening television. Only small, subtle but persistent changes remain. At Hartsfield-Jackson Airport, Flight SA-178 is preparing to board. Same time slot, same station, same familiar white lights. But it's no longer Gate C17. Ava Sterling is at the end of the line. No assistants, no bodyguards, no name tags. She was wearing a simple jacket, jeans, and a small handbag slung over her shoulder. If you didn't know, no one would guess. She's the CEO of Sterling Air. And that's what she wanted. A family stood before her. The mother dragged the old suitcase. The little boy hugged his neck pillow, his eyes half closed from exhaustion. The boy turned around and looked at Ava. "Excuse me, miss," he whispered. "Does the plane fly very high?" Ava smiled. "It's high enough to see the clouds," she said. "But it's still safe." The boy nodded, then turned back to lean against his mother. A brief moment. No one filmed it. No one posted it. But Ava felt she was in the right place. At the front of the line, a young flight attendant stood next to the boarding gate. She looked at each passenger, then at their tickets. "Don't look at the clothes. Don't look at the shoes. Just look at the people." "Good morning," she said to Ava in a natural tone. "Have a pleasant flight." Ava nodded. "Thank you," she replied. Nobody knows who she is, and nobody needs to know. Elsewhere in the airport, Margaret Collins stood in front of an information board. No flight attendant uniform, no silver badge. She was wearing a simple shirt and a logistics staff badge. Her task today is to check the equipment list before the flight takes off. A quiet job, no lights. Margaret moved slowly, carefully. She learned that rushing is the enemy of listening. A young employee approached. "Mrs. Margaret," he asked, "could you please take a look at this for me?" Margaret received the stack of papers. "Okay," she said. "Thank you for asking." That simple saying had once been absent from her world. Now it is what she cherishes most. Ava sat down in the chair near the window. She pulled the curtains open. Out there, the runway stretched out, sunlight reflecting off the aircraft like a thin band of light. She recalled the first time she stood here. Cold wind. A torn ticket. The moment she was asked to step aside. She remembers that feeling very clearly. It wasn't anger. It was familiarity. The familiar experience of being doubted before being listened to. Ava placed her hand on the armrest of the chair. She once wondered, what if I had remained silent that day? Perhaps the flight will still take off. Perhaps Margaret Collins will still be the senior purser. Perhaps Jason Miller will still tell his story in a way that is most advantageous to him. And perhaps someone else at a different gate will stand there again with that familiar feeling. But Ava didn't remain silent. It's not because she's stronger. It's because she's more tired. Tired of having to prove I belong in spaces that should be welcoming to everyone. Captain Daniel Wright stepped out of the cockpit. He stopped when he saw Ava. His eyes recognized her immediately. But he said nothing about his title. "We're about to take off," he said. "The weather's good." Ava smiled. "Thank you," she replied. A normal greeting, in the truest sense of the word. The plane taxied. The engine noise gradually subsided. A familiar feeling permeated the passenger compartment. As the plane's wheels lifted off the ground, Ava closed her eyes. Not to escape, but to feel. She thought about all the people who had sent her messages, stories that have never been reported in the newspapers. Those small moments when someone chooses to remain silent for fear of trouble. She didn't think she had changed the world. She just thought I moved eat a little. And sometimes a little is enough to get you started. Underground, Margaret Collins finished her shift. She took off her gloves and drubbed her calloused hands. A young colleague asked, "Are you tired?" Margaret pondered. "Yes," she replied. "But I'm not tired in the same way anymore." My colleague didn't understand, but Margaret understood. That evening, Ava received a short email. No long titles. No flowery language. Today's flight went smoothly. No incidents. Operations team. Ava smiled. Sometimes the absence of problems is a success. And now, as this story comes to a close, you're probably wondering, if I were Ava, what would I do? Perhaps you will speak up. Perhaps you will remain silent. Perhaps you will choose a middle ground. There is no single right answer for everything, but one thing always remains true. The way we treat others when no one is watching reveals our true selves. Gate C17 no longer appears in the notice board, but it exists in memory. As a gentle reminder, sometimes the bravest thing to do isn't to scream. Instead, it's about standing still, maintaining your dignity, and not stepping aside just to make others feel better. If this story reminds you of a moment in your own life, keep it. And if you believe that stories like these deserve to be told again, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe to the channel so we can meet again on our next journeys. Because each of your views is more than just a number. It serves as a reminder that we are listening and we haven't turned away.